June 10th, 2019. I don't think I will ever forget that date. You probably know what I'm talking about. E3 2019. Cyberpunk 2077 stole the show with Keanu Reeves' reveal. Normally, I'm not a person who pre-orders games.
No pre-orders.
But by God, I have never before witnessed the speed I demonstrated in order to whip out my credit card and input all the numbers in order to pre-order Cyberpunk 2077. Fast forwards to December 10th, 2020. The game is finally out after many delays.
My body is ready.
And I had a great time playing it, but at that moment I really couldn't recommend it to people since the issues it had on launch were substantial. It's fair to say that CDPR took a decent hit after the situation, but they managed to somewhat recover with release of patch 2.0. I say somewhat because some systems are still questionable, and for the next game, I would like to see them working in a way that makes sense, at least to me. I'm not here to dunk on Cyberpunk 2077. I'm here to look at its gameplay features, point out what really didn't work as far as I'm concerned, and most importantly contemplate how Cyberpunk 2 could fix them. Because at the end of the day, I want Cyberpunk 2 to be even better than the first game. Now, I have decided to split this video into two videos because I have a lot of things to say about this particular topic. I feel having a single video that is longer than 30 minutes might be too much, so let's see if this approach works better. As always, there will be timestamps, so feel free to use them to skip to a section that interests you the most. And before I start, please consider liking and sharing and subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot. Right, let's get started. Night City looks alive, but feels dead. Night City is, without exaggeration, one of the most visually impressive open worlds ever created. The density of streets, the verticality of the architecture, the neon lights cutting through smog. It has everything. If you ever wanted a big city in a cyberpunk setting, there it is. At first glance, it feels like a city that never sleeps. NPCs flood the sidewalks, traffic fills the road, advertisements shout at you from every direction. From a purely visual standpoint, Cyberpunk 2077 absolutely nails the fantasy. The problem is that once the initial awe fades, the illusion starts to crack. The city doesn't really react to you. Most NPCs exist purely as moving props, following extremely simple behavior loops. They walk in a straight line, repeat a handful of voice lines, and panic in identical ways when violence breaks out. I can stand in the middle of the street, pull out the weapon, shoot in the air, and within seconds the crowd dissolves into the same canned animations I've seen 100 times before. It stops feeling like a living city and starts feeling like a stage play where everyone forgot their lines. This lack of reactivity becomes even more noticeable when I'm trying to interact with the world beyond missions. Shops function more like menus than places. Bars are beautifully designed but mostly useless after a single scripted interaction. Clubs are atmospheric, yet hollow, offering little reason to return once their related quest is done. Apartments, despite being a major role-playing opportunity, feel disconnected from the wider city. The only reason why I was going back to the apartment was to hang out with Pan Am after I decided to take a bit of a breather, and that's about it. To me, it doesn't feel like I live in Night City. It feels like I'm sort of passing through a series of decorated levels. What makes this especially frustrating is that Cyberpunk's setting is perfect for systemic world design. A dystopian megacity should feel like a machine. It should be cold, uncaring, and constantly in motion. Instead, Night City often feels frozen in time, waiting for me to trigger the next quest marker. Outside of scripted moments, the city rarely surprises me. I don't ever stumble into evolving situations, power struggles, or dynamic events that change based on my actions. And once I'm done with all the quests and open world activities in a particular district, I've essentially seen it forever. This is where Cyberpunk 2 has a massive opportunity. The sequel doesn't need a bigger map or more visual clutter. What it needs is a city that behaves like a city. NPCs should have routines. Not deep simulations for every character, but believable patterns. For example, people going to work, hanging out, getting into trouble, reacting to changes in their environment. If a district is controlled by a gang, I should feel it in the streets. If a corp crackdown is happening, security presence should increase. The city should reflect its own power structures. Most importantly, Night City should remember me. My reputation as a merc, a fixer's favorite, or a corporate asset should shape how the world responds to me. NPCs should recognize me, avoid me, or try to exploit me. Certain areas should become safer or more dangerous depending on my actions. Let's say I wipe out a stronghold of Maelstrom gangers. After a couple of days, the area should see more activity from the general population, even perhaps converting the building where they were skulking into something else. When I cause chaos, the city shouldn't reset, it should adapt. That's how you turn a beautiful open world into a believable one. Next thing, what I would like to see is more interiors. Take mega buildings, for example. I really wanted a quest similar to the plot of the movie Dread to happen. I have a quest there, let's say to neutralize someone or to deliver something, but it spirals out of control and I'm locked inside. So now I gotta fight my way out of this particular situation. This is just one example where verticality and interiors can be utilized even more. So if Cyberpunk 2 gets this right, Night City or any other city the game might be set in won't just be a backdrop for missions. It will become the game's most important character, a living system that doesn't care about you until you force it to. And in my mind, that would be extremely revolutionary because at the end of the day, any single open world game will try to mimic this because it's that good. Lifepaths. Huge promise, minimal payoff. One of the most heavily marketed features of Cyberpunk 2077 was the Lifepath system. From the very beginning, you were asked to define who you were before Night City chewed you up. Were you a street kid who grew up hustling in the gutters? A corpo climbing the ladder inside a soulless megacorp? Or a nomad surviving on the fringes of society? On paper, this choice was supposed to shape your entire journey, and that was my idea initially when I heard about this particular system. However, in reality, its impact fades almost immediately after the opening hours. And that was such a shame. Don't get me wrong, the Lifepath introductions themselves are genuinely strong. Each one does an excellent job of establishing tone, background, and motivation. For a brief moment, it really feels like you're stepping into a distinct version of Night City. But once these prologues end, the game rapidly funnels everyone into the same experience. Basically, the story and the gameplay converge together, and the world stops caring about where you came from. Essentially, your past becomes little more than a dialogue tag. Yes, Lifepaths do occasionally unlock unique dialogue options. That's completely true. The problem is that most of these options are cosmetic. They rarely change the outcome of a conversation, unlock a different solution to a problem, or lead to exclusive content. At best, they provide extra flavor. At worst, they create the illusion of choice without any meaningful consequence. You're reminded of who you were, but the game rarely lets you act like that particular person. This is especially disappointing because Lifepaths should be the backbone of replayability. An RPG like Cyberpunk should encourage multiple playthroughs, not just through different builds, but through fundamentally different experiences. Instead, replaying the game as a different life path often feels like role-playing the same story with slightly altered voice lines. The city doesn't treat you differently. Factions don't open or close doors based on your background. You're still the same merc, doing the same job, for the same fixer. The next Cyberpunk game needs to treat Lifepaths not as a narrative flavor, but as a structural choice. Your background should affect what content is available to you, and just as importantly, what content is not. A corporate character should have deeper access to corporate spaces, insider information, and political manipulation, but face constant threats from rival corporations. A street kid should be embedded in gang politics, earning trust or making enemies on the streets, while struggling to operate in high-security corporate zones. And finally, a nomad should excel in vehicle-based gameplay, smuggling, and border operations, but feel like an outsider within the city itself. What's crucial here is that Lifepaths should create trade-offs. Choosing one should close certain doors while opening others. That's how these choices gain weight. Not every player should see everything in a single playthrough. If Cyberpunk 2 commits to this philosophy, Lifepaths could finally fulfill their original promise, which wasn't to treat them as a background lore, but as the foundation of how you experience Night City. If Cyberpunk 2077 asked the question, who were you before Night City, then Cyberpunk 2 needs to answer the most important one. Why does that still matter? Because at the end of the day, this is giving you the identity that you want to absorb, because that's the peak of an RPG experience. Lack of choices. I mentioned choices in the previous section. Well, when Cyberpunk 2077 was being talked about before launch, one of the biggest selling points was its choice and consequence. The idea was that you, as we, would shape your own story, and that your decisions would influence missions, determine who lives or who dies, and possibly even change the fate of Night City itself. But when I actually played the game, that promise doesn't hold up the way I initially expected. Don't get me wrong, I didn't have expectations to begin with. I tried to get into the game as clean as possible in terms of expectations, but something felt off. Under the hood, the way Cyberpunk 2077 handles choices feels very limited. The vast majority of dialogue options, I would say something like 90% of them, don't actually change anything meaningful. You might get a different line of dialogue or slightly different reaction from the NPC in front of you, but your story path doesn't branch. You're still heading towards the same missions, the same beats, and ultimately the same narrative structure regardless of how you talk. And trust me, this isn't just me spewing nonsense. I have seen it after 5 full playthroughs. What I'm talking about is that almost every conversation choice you make is essentially cosmetic, because the game gives you the illusion of agency, but it doesn't actually let you diverge in any meaningful way. To demonstrate, let's check out the pickup mission. That's the mission where you go to the Maelstrom hideout in the factory in order to get the bot for the heist. The pickup mission is the most complex mission in the game, with the most paths and endings. First branch starts meeting with Meredith or going straight to Jackie. If you go to Jackie, you either pay with your own money and leave without fighting, or you attack Maelstrom and leave after carving through them in the factory. If you, however, choose to meet with Meredith, there is a lot of stuff that you can do. You can accept the chip, or you just ignore her. If you take the chip, you fight the Maelstrom, but if you don't, you can fight Militech. Depending on the choices, at the end, you meet either Meredith, which you might consider to be the best outcome, or you meet Anthony. Also, if you're Corpo, you can tell Meredith you know the chip is infected, which then you can use to warn Royce. Or you can crack it for more money. This level of branching out doesn't exist anywhere in the base game for something like a secondary quest. And that's the problem I'm talking about. Additionally, the only other major choices I know of are saving Takemura, saving Oda, and deciding whether or not you want to be with Pan-Am. The rest happens no matter what you do, it's just a matter of cosmetics as far as I'm concerned. To me, this is a major departure from what I have in mind when we are talking about a big open world RPG. In Cyberpunk, while some side quests and companion relationships do have small consequences or optional outcomes, the core main story remains largely on rails. Even some of the more obscure choices rarely ripple back in the larger narrative. Outside of triggering optional side content or unlocking a specific achievement, many decisions only change which voice lines you hear later rather than reshaping the world around you. The game gives you a lot of dialogue options, and sometimes the consequences can be felt in small ways, but the story doesn't really branch the way you thought it would. Most choices don't restrict or unlock new main content, and you still end up on the same narrative path, heading towards the same key events. The game's structure remains far more linear than its setup suggests. Obviously, for the second game, I want to see more branching choices. I want to be in a situation where it forces me to replay the game, not because I have a new build, but because I want to experience the other side that I decided to ignore. If Cyberpunk 2 wants to truly evolve as an RPG, it has to fundamentally rethink how player choice works. The problem in Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't that there were no choices. The problem was that the game was structured in a way where most decisions were designed to feel important without actually changing anything. Police system. Immersion killer. If there's one system in Cyberpunk 2077 that can instantly shatter your immersion, it's probably the police system. And this is especially damaging in the game set in hyper-surveilled, authoritarian, corporate-controlled future. In a cyberpunk world, law enforcement should feel oppressive, unavoidable, and systemic. Instead, for a large portion of Cyberpunk 2077's life, the police felt artificial, gamey, and completely disconnected from the world they were supposed to control. As most of you remember, at launch, the problem was impossible to ignore. If you commit a crime, police officers would quite literally spawn behind you or in front of you or even on top of you. There were no patrols, no high-speed car chases, no logic to how law enforcement operated. I wasn't really being hunted, I was literally being summoned in front of the police. Or the other way around, it doesn't really matter. It didn't feel like Night City responding to criminal activity, it felt like the game flipping a switch. Even after improvements and reworks, the core issue remains. The police system doesn't feel like a natural part of the city. With patch 2.0, certain changes happened, making police more responsive to you. Their patrols will actively search for you, your wanted levels scale force realistically, there are more patrol cars, police radio conversation, roadblocks, max stack integration, and quick hackable officers. All of this adds gameplay depth. The system was redesigned to feel more like a real response with escalating chase mechanics instead of the old spawn pop shoot behavior that plagued the original release. However, as far as I'm concerned, there are still issues. For example, sometimes cops act strange by targeting you, even if they are hostile gang members or criminals nearby. Then there are instances with AI inconsistency, where they ignore ongoing firefights or crime. For some strange reason, you are always the core of their interest. Bugs also contribute to this situation. And finally, law enforcement sometimes seems very sensitive. You can trigger them with minor actions like raising a vehicle or bumping into a car driven by the NPCs. Cyberpunk 2 needs to completely rethink law enforcement as a city-wide system, not a punishment mechanic. Police presence should be visible before you even commit a crime. Patrols, drones, checkpoints, and scanners should signal danger. Crimes should escalate naturally, like in the real world, from suspicion to chase to full-scale response. Max stacks shouldn't appear because you crossed an invisible threshold. They should arrive because you become a genuine threat to the system. There's also massive potential for player interaction here. Fixers could help you to raise heat, or your bounty for that matter, for a price of course. Corrupt cops could be bribed. Certain Lifepaths might grant easier access to clean records or inside information. Gangs could also offer protection in specific districts. Instead of instantly punishing you, the police system could create gameplay choices, tension, and risk-reward decisions. The point that I'm making here is, if you commit a crime, the city CCTV should scan you immediately and you should end up in the database. Now, how fast would police officers respond to you depends on what you did. Minor crimes should be ignored because they are stretched thin as is, while serious crimes should be a basis for shoot first, ask questions later. In Cyberpunk 2, the law enforcement needs to feel like a part of city's DNA, because in a dystopian future obsessed with control, surveillance, and power, law enforcement shouldn't just break immersion. They should define it, and you should navigate through it in order to survive. Cyberware should change how you play, not just numbers. Cyberware is supposed to be the heart of Cyberpunk. It's the feature that separates this world from a standard shooter or RPG. The idea of replacing parts of your body with machinery, enhancing yourself beyond human limits, and slowly blurring the line between person and product is fundamental to the genre. And yet, in Cyberpunk 2077, Cyberware often feels surprisingly shallow. Let me explain. For most of the game, Cyberware functions as a collection of stat boosts, cooldown reductions, damage increases, armor values. Passive bonuses that quietly sit in the background while you play the same way you already were. Even powerful implants like Sandevistan or Berserk, while fun, tend to boil down to press button and become stronger for a few seconds. The fantasy is there, but the impact is limited. The implants make you more efficient, but they rarely force you to think differently. You don't have to adapt to your body adapts perfectly to you, with no friction, no cost, and no consequences. And that's the missing piece as far as I'm concerned, and to be honest, the most important one, which is the consequences. In Cyberpunk 2077, Cyberware is almost entirely positive. You install more, you get stronger, and the only real limiter is a capacity bar. There's no meaningful downside, no psychological toll, no social reaction. You can chrome yourself into oblivion and become a walking weapon, and the world treats it as completely normal. NPCs don't comment, dialogues don't shift. The game never asks whether becoming more machine than human means something. Yeah, you have the Regina questline with cyberpsychosis stuff, but it never fleshed out fully in order to see what the hell is happening with that thing. There were some attempts, in order to make this a thing, in the Phantom Liberty with Cyberware capacity. Exceeding the limit results in a reduced maximum health pool. That's about it. Also, you can trigger a Fury state, which provides buffs to damage, crit chance, and crit damage, rewarding risky, high chrome playstyle. Don't get me wrong, it's a welcomed addition, but I wanted more. I wanted it to be more impactful, especially on my character, where I would lose stats due to temporal insanity for a brief period of time, and if this continued, maybe it's not such a good thing to have. But in the end, it just felt like surprise cooldown trigger. And that's about it. Cyberpunk 2 needs to make Cyberware transformative, not incremental. Installing major implants should visibly and mechanically change how you move, fight, and interact with the world. Different leg implants should alter traversal and animation. Heavy arm cyberware should change melee flow and environmental interactions. Neural implants should affect dialogue pacing, perception, or even how information is presented to you. Cyberware should reshape gameplay. Just as important, Cyberware should come with trade-offs, not artificial nerves, but believable consequences. The more you augment yourself, the more the world should respond to you. NPCs might react with fear, distrust, or admiration. Certain social options could disappear as you lose your humanity. Some fixers might see you as an asset, others as unstable. The idea of cyberpsychosis should be a looming risk you actively manage one way or the other. Then there's also massive potential in imperfect implants. Black market cyberware that's cheaper but unstable. Experimental tech that grants incredible power at unpredictable moments. Implants that glitch under stress, forcing you to adapt on the fly. Instead of cyberware being a straight line of upgrades, it could become a serious or difficult decision about how far you're willing to go and what are you willing to lose in the process. While in Cyberpunk 2077, cyberware makes you stronger, in Cyberpunk 2, cyberware should make you different. It should define your playstyle, affect how the world treats you, and constantly remind you that every upgrade comes at a cost. Because in a genre built around losing pieces of yourself to survive, becoming more powerful should never feel completely safe. Life outside of combat is too thin. For a game set in one of the densest, culturally rich cities in sci-fi, Cyberpunk 2077 offers surprisingly little to do when you're not fighting. Once the shooting stops and the quest markers disappear, Night City often feels hollow. You can walk its streets, admire the visuals, and listen to the music, but you just can't really live there. And that's the major problem for an RPG that's supposed to sell the fantasy of existing in a dystopian megacity. Most of Cyberpunk's 2077 game loop revolves around combat. You drive to location, kill or disable enemies, collect loot, and then you repeat. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, but when nearly every activity funnels back into this particular loop, the world starts to feel one-dimensional. Night City becomes a series of combat arenas rather than a place with its own rhythms, distractions, and downtime. For example, bars, clubs, and markets are all beautifully designed, but largely non-interactive. You visit them once for a quest, maybe buy a drink or talk to an NPC, and then there is no real reason to return. These places don't function as social hubs, sources of emergent encounters, or ongoing activities. They exist to be seen, but not to be used. Cyberpunk 2 needs to treat downtime as part of the experience, not as a filler. The city should offer activities that let you engage with Night City on a human level. Gambling, underground fight clubs, illegal street races, brain dance, social hangouts with your companions. These activities should affect your reputation, your relationships, and even your access to certain opportunities. The best downtime activity that we have were those arcade games, and that really wasn't enough. Companions in particular are underused outside of their quests. In that sense, Cyberpunk 2077 introduces strong characters, but once their storylines are done, they largely fade into the background. Yes, there are apartments, but that's very limited experience as far as I'm concerned. And believe me, I'm thirsty for more. Cyberpunk 2 could deepen these relationships through repeatable interactions, shared activities, and dynamic conversations that change based on your choices. Not every interaction needs to advance the plot, but sometimes it just needs to reinforce that these people exist beyond their questlines. Ultimately, life outside of combat is what makes the violence meaningful. If Night City is nothing but a battleground, then fighting through it loses its weight. But if the city feels like a place where people live, struggle, relax, and survive, then every conflict feels like it disrupts something real. Cyberpunk 2077 gave us the outlines of that world, and as far as I'm concerned, Cyberpunk 2 needs to fill it with moments that don't involve pulling the trigger. This marks the end of part 1 of this video. Stay tuned for part 2.